The meeting is being held in the grand jury room in the town hall in Colchester and is also being broadcast live over the internet, where it can be watched via the council's YouTube channel, where the recording will be available to view afterwards. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Action in the event of emergency. There are no practiced alarms for this evening, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate the town hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the town hall in St Ronald Street. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off again when you've finished speaking. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. And remember, if your phone does go off, it's a £20 fine to the Mayor's charities. The provisions in the Constitution around the timings of breaks will apply to this meeting. So introductions. So I've introduced myself. So I will now go to my left as panel members introduce themselves.
Good evening, Rory Doyle, Assistant Director for Environment.
Tracy Arnold, Councillor for Stanway.
Richard Cope-Taylor, representing Castle Ward.
Hayley Rippingale, representing Newtown and Christchurch.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer.
William Sunnox, representing Rural North.
Mick Spindler, representing Shrub End.
Andrew Ellis, Markstown and Layer Ward.
Sue Lissy Moore, Prittigate Ward.
Paul Smith and St John's Ward, substituting for Councillor Barris.
Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, everyone. And so goes the substitutions. So Councillor Smith's indicated he's subbing for Councillor Burrows. Urgent items. There are no urgent items tonight. Declarations of interest. Anyone have any declarations of interest to declare? No, absolutely fine. Minutes of the previous meetings. So these are the meetings on the 22nd of June and the 19th of July. Always a fabulous read. Anyone got any amendments they wish to make to that? Any comments, or are they happy to approve? Councillor Lismore.
It was just a comment, really. I just noticed that on the minutes it's saying a panel member said this and a panel member said that. It's quite actually handy to have who said what. And if only just so you can check your own minutes, just to check, you know, it is correct what you've been saying. So I think personally, I would find it would help to actually be the individual named rather than just a panel member.
Sorry, Councillor Lismore, it's generally, I used to do that, but the accepted practice not to do that anymore, not to specifically name councillors in minutes. According to, I think Knowles is the accepted authority on the matter, but I'm happy to look into that and go back if possible.
Yeah, thank you for that, Matt. That does seem odd because you do want democratic accountability as well of what councillors have raised and said at meetings, but we can check on that because obviously we need to check on minutes of other panels we're not on. Thank you for raising that. Is everyone happy though to approve the minutes to that? Excellent. And Councillor Molly Bloomfield is just joining the meeting. There's quite bad traffic today if you're watching on YouTube. Right, so that takes us to Have Your Say. So the first person I have for Have Your Say is Jane Black, if she's here. Excellent. You've managed to avoid the horrific traffic. So if you've never done this before, Jane, you have 3 minutes. A bell will sound on 2 to give you a minute warning, and then you'll have a minute to reply at the end once that's all done, and we may have discussed what you said.
Right, well, my name is Jane Black and I live in Wivenhoe, and I wanted to talk about public access to Ferry Marsh, which is also in Wivenhoe. Ferry Marsh was given to the council in 1999 as part of a Section 106 agreement. The land registry details show that the council made 2 covenants. The council hereby covenants with the transferors for the benefit of the remainder of the retained land as follows: not to use the property otherwise than for public open space. And 2, to keep the property in a clean and tidy state, etc. This was the only open space to have been provided for the adjacent housing estate built in the first decade of this century. Now, the council website says that there's a 24-hour public access to the reserve, and the planning map shows a countryside pathway across the marsh. We're linking Rowhedge Ferry Road to Wivenhoe Trail, where there's a sign saying welcoming people to the reserve. Now, the council kept this tract mown for many years. However, there have been problems with flooding, and for 2 years it was impassable and it could not be mown. Now, the sluice was cleared earlier this year and the water levels went down, but the reserve was closed for the nesting season because it was thought protected species could be nesting in the reeds which had grown along the route of the pathway. The nesting season is now well over, but the gates to the reserve remain locked. There's a pressure group that would like to see the path permanently closed and public access severely restricted, with possibly a higher water table level. We were promised a public consultation on the future, but this has not yet happened. Work was scheduled in late August to start clearing the path, but was cancelled the day before with no explanation. Was pressure brought to bear by the bird lobby. There are around 7 to 8 hectares of land currently covered in reeds. This would seem to provide space both for reed nesting birds and for a path giving public access. I would like to urge that the path is mown and the reserve reopened until the outcome of the public consultation is known. If it is delayed until the spring, it will again be argued that there might be protected species nesting along the route. I would also urge that weight is given to the opinions of the residents in the immediate vicinity for whose benefit the open space was provided. And a question, is Colchester in breach of its covenant by currently keeping the reserve locked? Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. You can remain seated if you like. Rory, I think this will be one for yourself.
Sorry, there are 2 people who'd like to speak on the same issue.
Okay, shall we all take it as one? Brilliant. Okay, thank you, Jane. Much appreciated. And it is Robert Neve who is next.
Thank you very much. I have some difficulty in speaking, so if it's not clear, and probably best I read because it will be clearer. I'm one of the local residents that overlook the marsh and have enjoyed it. So my statement says, I'm happy to leave the objective arguments to Mrs. Black. Simply, as a local resident, I want to see the path through Ferry Marsh open again. I want to enjoy walking through such natural surroundings, like I did for excess of 15 years since moving here. Locals and visitors are also enjoyed, without disturbing, as far as I know, the wildlife there, especially water voles, specifically introduced some time ago. Please, as a committee, apply the necessary pressure to open this path again, at least until a proper and fair public consultation has clearly indicated that it is better closed. Also, would you ask the council to please fund the correct measures to ensure the marsh is not flooded again, which causes difficulty for the voles and other small animals.
Thank you very much. And then it is Joan Sawyer.
Following on from what Rob has just said, I think it was, England, Natural England, 8 years or more ago, they dug out 2 ditches to a total cost of 8,000 plus for the water voles. I'm most concerned that since the flooding has occurred, that the animals are not surviving there, though other people have told me there's details of deer DNA, they must have gone across in waders or swimming suits because it was so deep with water, to check that they are still alive and able to live there. I'm more concerned with the sluice and the flooding, and I understand that Colchester Council have managed or are going to manage to get either the developers themselves to get a permanent situation of not flooding, and that the marsh will remain what it was in previous years. I'm a member of the Wivenhoe Woods volunteers. I have been working with Richard and now Nicola, and I'm really upset to see that it's just become a complete, you could say jungle, though it's a marsh, of just reeds. The entire place is covered in reeds. There's no access to it, and therefore you'll have to saw down those 2 signs we put up that said, welcome to the marsh, because no one's welcome there. Thank you.
Thank you all for speaking on that. Roy, shall I pass it over to you to address some of those concerns?
Thank you. And thank you, Jane, Robert and Joan, for talking this evening. Jane, I believe you may have received an email from an officer earlier today in response to the submission that you sent through. So there has been quite a lot of difficulty with the flooding in Ferry Marsh, as you're very much aware. It's quite a complex issue relating to some complex land ownership in terms of a faulty sluice gate that's been in the ownership of the Crown Estate. As you suggested, works have been undertaken earlier in the year. Officers of the council have been working really closely with the ward councillors in Wivenhoe, the Essex Wildlife Trust and Natural England regarding both the land that we're responsible for and the land currently in the ownership of the Crown Estate with regard to future maintenance and how that's dealt with going forward. The intention absolutely is to undertake an event, to have conversations with local stakeholders, residents, volunteers, and that is due to be advertised shortly. And I think the officer sent that information to you earlier today, Jane. We haven't specifically set a date, but it will be late November. And as soon as we've got that, we will publicise it. That will give the opportunity to have conversations with local stakeholders for their views to be aired, and equally for an update to be given on the work that officers and other colleagues and experts from Natural England and the like have been doing. Thank you.
So you are entitled to another minute if you'd like, or if you're happy with the response or what you've heard. Of course, Jane, please do.
Residents have taken up this issue at various Wivenhoe Town Council meetings. In your email to me, you said that there'd be discussions with Wivenhoe Town Council. I don't think Wivenhoe Town Council's actually debated the issue either in full council or in its environmental committee meetings. And I suspect the views that you've been hearing are the views of one particular councillor.
Right. Thank you all for coming, and that is helpful advice. William, are you okay just to turn the mic off at the other end? Cheers. That's all right. And yeah, I mean, I know the land quite well because I walk my dog there. I think my dog knows it better than me, but it's, I know the land you're talking about, and I think I got lost in there once because the reeds are that big. So hopefully that's something that can continue and we can get a resolution there. So the next speaker I have, and final have your say speaker, is Mr. Steve Kelly. So similar to before, Mr. Kelly, 3 minutes, bell goes a minute before, and you can have a minute after.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors and officers. Yesterday was, my name's Steve Kelly, by the way. Yesterday was World Vegan Day. Today is World Vitamin D Day. And you may think this isn't directly related to sustainability, but I think health sustainability is absolutely essential. Most of us, 80% of us, are vitamin D deficient, and that increases during the darker months as we're entering now. We can debate the side effects of modern medicines and vaccinations, but we know the side effects of vitamin D is less mental health issues, less heart disease, less strokes, less allergies, less inflammatory diseases, you know, on and on. The cost benefit analysis of this is just crazy. And blatantly, the main reason why this isn't implemented in this country is because it costs the big pharmaceutical industry so much money because they don't dole out the conventional medications to treat these allergies and inflammatory diseases, etc. So I'm asking if any of the councillors here, because I asked at full council, I specifically asked about vitamin D and I didn't get a straight answer. I've asked directly individual councillors and it's costing thousands, if not millions of lives. And I fear it's going to be costing billions of lives in the next 15 to 20 years. So please, can we look at the film that's just coming out, The Real Anthony Fauci, which is, he's the chief medical, or he was, he stepped aside, the chief medical officer of the United States. He's overseeing both the AIDS treatment with the AZT and all the terrible effects that had, and he also oversaw the remdesivir. I've still got a minute left, have I? Yeah, I did get a good answer from Councillor David King, the council leader, but he didn't address, sadly, the vitamin D issue. And this is absolutely critical. We deny ourselves access to vitamin D through clothing ourselves, being away from our evolutionary home where we evolved to maximize our vitamin D. And it is such a shame that people are dying from infections because they haven't got enough vitamin D. We need to address this now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kelly, for your comments, and I guess we'll take them under consideration and keep an eye out for the film. Oh, I've got questions from Councillor Ellis and then listen more.
So, just trying to understand what the point you're making is. Are you expecting us to supply vitamin D free to people, or what's the point you're making? It's £6.99 for a year's supply of vitamin D if you go to Amazon. I'm just wondering what you're asking us to do as an authority.
Thank you for that response. I think the first and most important aspect is just raising awareness, you know, amongst you here with anybody you know. We used to actually fortify our staple foods like breads and, you know, flour and margarines like back in the 40s and 50s. But one person had a reaction of overdosing apparently on vitamin D, and they reduced the amount. Unlike the Scandinavian countries, they continued because obviously they're closer to the Arctic and have less access to UVB rays, which makes vitamin D. No, I'm not suggesting. I mean, if you can lobby central government and local health authorities to be more aware and you know, lobby central government to fortify the staple foods again, like we used to. And yeah, I appreciate and get it on Amazon, but you know, getting out in the sun is the most natural way of doing it, preferably. Thank you.
Councillor Lissamore, or is that answered?
Sorry, yeah, I was going to ask exactly the same question, really. I would certainly suggest, I don't know what correspondence you've had with Essex County Council, obviously is more of that covers more of the public health than Colchester Borough Council has. And I would certainly recommend that you get in contact with the leader and perhaps the cabinet member at Essex County Council, as they have more of a remit on public health than Colchester Borough Council do. But thank you very much for coming and raising awareness of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. And yeah, I was going to recommend the same as Councillor Lissamore for, yeah, public health. Okay, lovely. Thanks for giving up your evening. Okay, so that is Have Your Say done. So it's over to Ben for the Climate Emergency Action Plan. A very, very long report, but very comprehensive as ever.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this item is on an update to the Council's Climate Emergency Action Plan. So we first published it in June 2021, and we're prepared an update to it with some new actions that weren't in it last time, some updates to existing actions based on developments of them over the past year or so. And so it's just to bring that report or bring that action plan, sorry, to the panel for comment on some of the content within it. We tried to make some improvements this year to make it more accessible to residents. For example, so we've got a section at the end of the action plan that we plan to separate out to give more information for residents on what they can do about reducing their environmental impact and tackling climate change. We've also got some more case studies within the action plan to actually show that we are doing the talk and not just doing the walk, sorry if you want to do it like that, and not just talking the talk, and showing how projects are happening on the ground. And so I'd welcome comments on that. We've also got a new theme within the action plan this year, which is on climate adaptation, which is basically reflecting that a lot of the impacts of climate change are already in train, and as much as we can reduce emissions as possible, and obviously that's really important, there's impacts already occurring that we can't do anything about. All that we can do is adapt to those changing impacts, things like severe weather events and things like that. So things like sea level rise, coastal erosion, increasing temperatures. We want to do more work on that as a council this year and to understand that a lot better. And one of the projects that we're working with the University of Essex on that will contribute to this is a project called Building with Nature, which is looking at natural sea defences, specifically use of oysters to help protect against sea level rise and coastal erosion. We've got a couple of speakers who are working on that project with us today, and they prepared a presentation to tell you more about the project and for you to give some comments about too. So I'll hand over to Michael to introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ben, and good evening, everybody, councillors and officers. My name is Dr. Michael Steinke, and I'm a marine scientist working at the university in Colchester. So it's a great pleasure being here in this historical, rather formal environment. Makes a change to teaching first-year marine ecology students, I can tell you that. So yeah, we wanted to report back to you. We've developed this project in collaboration with Ben and Rosa over the last few months, really. An exciting project, we think, and we thought that it might be worthwhile informing you about the project, our current status and aims, and also maybe listening to you, keen to hear what your comments are and what your feedback is. So we prepared a few slides, and they are sort of centrally run from Rob in the corner, I understand. So I think he's preparing that at the moment. I also would like to point out that I see that Councillor John Acker from West Mersey Town Council kindly has joined us this evening. That's much appreciated as a local representative of the people that we are working with directly. So if we go to the very first slide, maybe I just want to introduce the title again. Thank you. So the project is called Building with Nature for ecosystem-based coastal defense and economic resiliency in Colchester. We then can go to the next slide. The goals for tonight really are to introduce you to our project and then hopefully also inspire some coordinated action. So again, we would like to listen to you and then see how we can take our project forward into the next stage, maybe with your assistance centrally from the Colchester Borough Council as well. Next slide. I want to run you through these three items here, the challenge and the opportunity for you, for us as a community, the science behind some of the work that we're doing, and then how we're going to fulfill that promise, or how we are going to achieve our aims. Next slide. So first up, our challenge and opportunity. I'm used to doing these slide things myself, so I'm a little bit out of control here. So we go to the next slide. So the next slide basically highlights the opportunity that the oyster fishery already has established for us. The shellfish fishery is part of a total of 800 million pounds annually that are generated in the industry, in the fishing industry. You see in the photo on the right there, that's just Brightlingsea Harbour, some of the work that we are supporting on settlement discs. So these are special discs that we put into the water to monitor settlement of oyster spat, little larvae that float in the environment for a certain amount of time and then make a decision to settle down. You can imagine for an oyster, that's a very important decision to make, because that's where they will stay for the rest of their life, basically. So very important for them to find the right spot. So there's a great opportunity for the borrower as such to obviously take a larger interest in that and to drive this opportunity in the right way forward to the benefit of the, of the social side and of the economic side of the borrower, I would imagine. Next slide. So this is a picture, a page from the Piscatorial Atlas from 1883, quite dated now. And the orange bits, it's a bit hard to see, I guess. The orange bits there, those are the areas where fishermen went to harvest the native oyster. And there's a lot of history around the native oyster, I know, and if I'm not mistaken, there's some silver artifacts in that cupboard there that are oyster related, and oyster measure and a few other things as well. And you see in the area highlighted there that our coastline was completely buffered by these native oysters at some stage. But then unfortunately, due to industrial scale over harvesting over the years, you see it in the bottom right there, the boats that went out every day and collected, thousands and thousands of these oysters off the bottom of the sea, which was a very cheap source of protein for, many people in London and other big towns in the United Kingdom. So I want to point out here that, 150 years ago, oysters were really quite present all along the coast. They had a protective factor already, but all of this has disappeared over the years due to overfishing and the introduction of diseases. Next slide. We now focus our project a little bit more on the subject of sea rise, which obviously is a result from ongoing warming, but also the fact that our part of the country is actively sinking into the seabed due to rebound after the last ice age. Scotland is coming up and East Anglia is sinking down. We obviously realized that we had to protect our coastlines one way or another, increase intensity and frequency of storms, for example, as well. But these hard engineered coastal defense structures, they're very costly, unnatural, and hence unsustainable. They will eventually fail. This is not a long-term investment. We can calculate how long these defenses will last. They cost a lot of money. The picture on the right there shows dredged material from Harwich Harbour that is deposited in front of West Mersey, which obviously is a benefit if these dredged materials can be used, but still it comes at a cost depositing this at the right place. And it's obviously some sort of disturbance as well. So we move on to the next slide then. This is sort of the tetraptych image of what we envisage, really. You see all the way on the left is the typical sort of mud surface that is currently present, devoid of oyster reefs. And over the years, we would like to develop that into a dynamic, adaptable oyster reef that would assist with defending the coastline. These oyster reefs will take part of the energy out of the waves and hence will buffer the pounding that the coastline sees, hence reduce the erosion. So soft engineered coastal defense using a living dynamic reef that will grow with sea level rise is economically beneficial, natural, and sustainable as well. So there's some benefits out of that. You can see that, the biodiversity is much higher than on the mud surface on the left. Fisheries may benefit because it's a nursing ground for fish larvae as well. Next slide. So, the returns on a possible investment, they are really quite maximized by building oyster reefs. It would bolster, bird habitats. It would, provide higher biodiversity. And they are, better at protecting our coast from erosion than more expensive concrete barriers, basically. Next slide. So the science, then, this is what we are engaging with directly at the university. There's a bit of a diagram there on the left with the word risks in the center. This is what we need to assess. We need to assess the hazards Now that the hazards are existing, of course, rising sea levels. We then to think about what are our vulnerabilities and what is it in terms of the adaptive capacity that we can use in order to protect coastal communities from rising sea levels. So reducing our vulnerability and building adaptive capacity can help us to reduce social and economic risks ultimately, and that should be of interest to the Borough Council. So why Colchester? Why now? I think we think that you are uniquely placed in tackling a project like this or moving forward with us into the right direction. There's a very rich tradition of coastal ecosystem management in the area. There's political will. We see that by engaging with Rosa and Ben on this particular subject area. We've got a very rich CBO ecosystem. There's a large interest in local community groups to support initiatives that center on ecosystem biodiversity and sustainability questions. And climate and energy concerns are salient for the public, so it would also go down well with the voters, we believe. So Colchester, again, you have all the assets, and you have the support, and you have the academic side locally as well to move projects like this forward. I think it's a unique opportunity, and something that is particularly salient for Essex, of course, with the long coastline that it has. So what have we done so far, fulfilling the promise? This is one of the focus points, really, that we have been targeting in the last few months in our project, an idea around shell recycling to build living reefs. And I don't know whether you can all see the detail, but I don't think it's so important, really. The image on the left there shows the life cycle of the oyster. I don't know whether you're aware of that, but oysters come in females and males. They release eggs and sperms into the water. There's external fertilization. Then a larva develops, which floats with the plankton, with the tides coming in and out for about 2 weeks, depending on temperature and on food availability. They develop an eye spot that they use to sense the light, and they then swim down towards the bottom where it's dark, and they develop a foot that they use to sense the surface. And oysters, they show a behavior that's called gregarious fatfall. They're almost like humans, which are gregarious. They assemble in towns and cities, and oysters do the same. As soon as they sense an oyster surface, they know this is a good spot for me to settle down on, because there are other oysters already. And if they have survived and grown, they know that they will survive as well. So oyster fishermen, they've used that traditional knowledge to then manage their fisheries. They've got a certain fishery area that they can control. They put oyster shell into that area to then attract the larvae. And that's the harvest that they may have in 4 years' time then. They use that to manage the fishery. So we are suggesting we can use that knowledge, of course, as well, to build oyster reefs to protect the coastline, and that would work in potentially also with the fisheries, of course, as well. This is nothing new. In the middle, you see sort of a call out, a shout out from some government institutions in the USA, in Nantucket, where several of these oyster recycling projects are already up and running. There's a big idea to protect New York City from future storms using natural oyster reefs, and the image on the right just describes that, how all of this could work. So we looked into, is it feasible to try something like that here locally, particularly focusing on Mersey Island as well. So the progress so far, I don't want to run through the whole list, but it's been quite an exciting period over the last few months. Just a few highlights. We are going to present this project at COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. My Egyptian colleague, Maged Ali, will go and present that in person. And then a few of us, we are joining remotely, including also Councillor John Acker. We had some engagement with the community via Mersey Live, for example. We are involved talking to West Mersey Council. We are talking, we've only done that this afternoon at the last time, with INORI, the Essex Native Oyster Restoration Initiative, which is based around the Zoological Society of London, who run similar projects or have started similar projects already and are currently engaged in a project up in the northeast of England with one of the councils there. So we feel it has been quite successful in terms of motivating and informing people, educating people about the issue in itself, and people are giving us some good feedback already on that. So on the almost last slide, I think then we have the next steps, which center around engagement, reporting and project legacy, and also celebration. So we continue with community engagement, using particularly West Mersey Town Council and their citizens. In this, we are analyzing community feedback all along. We've got one of the project members is an expert in social media, so they can trace quite nicely of what people talk about in, in Facebook and Instagram, etc. A face-based summary report. We are producing a project website is coming along. It's only happening next week, I think. And then we want to celebrate via an art show at the Colchester Climate Emergency Hub that we've got some funding for, and therefore engage with local artists and again use it as a tool to educate, to inform people in the community, really. The last slide then briefly introduces the team around this project, the core team. I mentioned Rosa and Ben already, who are not pictured on this slide. It's more the Essex focused team here. Excuse me, team. So it includes Borka Bo, a sociologist, Beth Greenwood, which is joining us in the back here. She is a research assistant working on the project. Magid Ali, as I mentioned, he is the social media expert working in the Essex Business School, and then myself, Michael Steinke, in the School of Life Sciences. So once again, thank you very much for your interest, for inviting us to present to you, and I'm very curious to hear your opinions about the project so far. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. That's great. Any questions, comments from any panel members currently? Oh, Councillor Lissamore.
Thank you. I mean, that was incredibly interesting. Again, I'm going to ask sort of the same question that we asked the speaker earlier. What do you want from this council?
Okay, so from this council, at this point, we need to build understanding, I guess. We are in direct contact with Ben and Rose already. So occasionally we ask them, can you do this for us? Can you do that for us? And they are very supportive with that. In the long run, because this project is a very short project. It's only been, running for a few months, and at the end of November, we are running out of funds, basically. So we're actually now searching around for new funds. We need your support with being successful with getting to these funds. Hence, occasionally we may ask you for a letter of support from the council. It may be difficult for you, because you're representing certain parties, etc., to be directly involved, but we would be very keen to hear about your opinion about that. If somebody feels, and I know that John Acker, for example, is very motivated to assist us with anywhere where he can, this is exactly what we need as a university to show to the funders there is local buy-in. This is not just ivory tower academic stuff, but this actually has meaning to the community, and you as politicians, as councillors, you're supportive of the idea, and you see the benefits that this could potentially bring to your communities, and that would help you with moving forward. So this is where we quite often struggle making these contacts initially, and that's why it's so good that you give us this opportunity to inform you, to talk to you, as you build understanding about what we need. If we were to contact you and say, councillors, now we need some support from you, please, this is the idea, this is a proposal, this is how we now lead this into a 2-3 year program with lots of money coming from taxpayer ultimately, but we need you to support that, otherwise we wouldn't have a chance to get the funding.
And sorry, can I just ask, is it possible you can send us the link, please, of that slideshow?
Yeah, I'm very happy to share the slideshow. So I think as soon as our webpage is up and running next week, we could make this sort of material publicly available. That's no problem at all. Yes.
That would be good to go to all councillors.
Or if you wanted to circulate that amongst you, I'm very happy for that to happen. If that would, stimulate further communication that you may have with others in your teams, that would be very useful.
So I've got Councillor Ellis, Kirkby Taylor, and then Bloomfield.
Thank you, Chairman, and actually thank you for a fascinating presentation. Enjoyed that. It's really nice to see joined up working with the university in Colchester. To be honest, we're a university town. We often don't think of ourselves as a university town, and the more working we have with the university, I think the better for both of us, actually. £800 million opportunity you put on your slide. Is that the fishing industry in the UK?
That's in the UK. Yes, that's the total UK. So the shellfish industry is only a small part.
That's what I was going to say.
the-
It sounded too big a figure.
Yeah, the beauty about the shellfish industry, I guess, it's a very sustainable source of protein, and there's room for increasing shellfish harvest in the future. That would need a shift in, I guess, in consumption in a way, and acceptance.
And that's where I was going with next, is how do you consume what sort of quantities of shellfish are you looking at? Because you're looking at oysters specifically. It sounds like it's only oysters.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you can't, because I would have thought the UK probably consumes more mussels than oysters. But you can't use mussels because oysters will settle and feel that it's a mussel and think this isn't a friendly place to stay. I'm assuming, I don't know. My house is built on oyster shell, so I know that it's something that has been used in construction, as well as what you're trying to do. And I'm assuming, I mean, is it that you're looking at, you need vast quantities of the shells to recycle effectively? Or is it that once the thing is it self-sustaining, because you've got the more shells you've got, the more live oysters are going to be growing on those. Therefore, you're actually really looking at seeding seeding reefs with the shells. Once you've got them, you've then got a living reef with an increased oyster.
So the expectation is exactly as you said. We need to provide an initial activation energy, a seeding ground for the oysters to settle down on. And that's exactly what the oyster fishermen also do. But they manage this activity as part of their commercial activities, the harvesting of oysters. The idea here is to seed oysters in areas where it's really important to protect the coastline. We know that there are certain areas, microhabitats where erosion is happening, and we need to protect those areas. There are trade-offs of that, of course, difficulties that include other users, yachting, the marine industry, fishermen, bathing, swimmers and all that. So obviously there's some critical things that we would have to overcome. But again, with education and with understanding, I think it could be possible to say, okay, this is an area where we really have to do something. Otherwise, the line will erode further, and hence we need to focus on the protection rather than on the use by other users at that point. But that is in the far future. So coming back to the initial question, we had a discussion this afternoon around exactly the point. Where does the recycling come in? Is it feasible? It's probably a very interesting tool in order to engage others and to build understanding about why these things are happening. Is it economically feasible? I'm not 100% sure yet. It might be cheaper just to buy in limestone or to buy in shell from shellfish processors, for example, and use that as a seeding material, rather than thinking about, how can we recycle all that material and bring it back from London restaurants, etc., where there are logistical constraints on that. So we're working on that as an idea. But you're right that once it's seeded, it will dynamically grow on its own. It will perpetuate itself, and it will probably also grow in size. And it will lead, to the projected benefits of increased fisheries in the area and the structure enhancement that you get along the coast.
But you'd have to manage that fishery really carefully, because if you produce lots of oysters and you've increased the fishing, then you're actually going to be stripping the very reef that you're trying to create. I would have thought it's going to be quite difficult.
Yeah. So there's a fisheries environment, the fisheries area that in this particular case locally is controlled by Colchester's oyster fishery, and there is the oyster reef area. This must be separated in a way. So these are separate areas. And the fishermen, they only really work on relatively small patches inside the fishery. And that is fine for the amount of oysters that they're currently producing and are able to sell to restaurants and to fish markets. So looking forward, again, there will need to be a process where we identify particular areas where this would be suitable. There will be legal constraints on, how to do that. Dumping material in the sea is not straightforward and trivial. You need a marine license for that, i.e. all of these things would have to be looked into. But as an idea, in order to stimulate the thinking process about what is it we can actually do, what choices we have in terms of geoengineering the coastline to the benefit of the communities, it's something valid to look at and to analyze, I think.
So I've got Councillor Kirkby Taylor, Bloomfield, and then Sunnox.
Thank you. So I love this kind of project. It's the kind of low-tech, very simple solution that will give us real gains, measurable gains in a time frame that people will be able to understand, because it's only going to be 4 or 5 years before those oysters have grown fully, and they're going to start producing some limited benefits, I'd imagine. It's a shame that the Have Your Say speakers from earlier have already left, because this is exactly the kind of project that could have helped to defend the marsh. Yeah, but is it marsh or fen? I'm not sure. Yeah, marsh. That could help in the long term protect that marsh and alleviate some of the problems there. So it could help tie into that as well. The question I would like to ask is, what kind of timescales are we looking at here? You said you have been looking at this for a couple of months and you're going to run out of funding in November. When would you be looking at starting the seeding, and how long would it be before you actually started to see measurable returns on this? Because it's if we can start putting the shells down at Christmas, then that's great. But if it's going to take 2 years to get the logistics in place, that's a different prospect.
So the principal concept is quite easy and straightforward. You need shell material or hard material. You may encourage a few volunteers, hopefully, to back this material up. And then you identify certain areas where you're allowed to put it in place onto the seabed, and that would then encourage the spetfall. And that is what has happened over the last few years, as far as I'm aware, everywhere along the coast anyway, not that volunteers put it down, but, the settlement of oysters. I remember, Brightlingsea, when I started working at Essex about 16 years ago now, I took students onto the strip that was exposed, immersed at low tide. And there was a lovely oyster reef, but then the local sailing club, they complained because the kids, they cut open their feet, and then the fishermen had to dredge it all up. And it has disappeared since. So this is just part of the natural process, and it will, as you say, it will take some time to establish. But once you've got the hard substrate in place, so the problem here is that the oyster does not find suitable settlement space on a muddy surface. And at the moment, the Essex coast is muddy surface. It wasn't like that in the past. There were changes all the time. When the Romans rowed up to Colchester in their boats, it was all covered in seagrass. It was a transparent, clear water estuary, basically covered with seagrass on both sides. That has all disappeared. And the oysters have been dredged up. They've all been disappeared along the Essex coast. So, they're constant change. So the question now is, how can we use that knowledge in order to create that benefit for us, and how feasible is it? If you were to put in this material next year in the summer, by August, September, you would have the first oyster settling on it. So this is the typical time that the Pacific rock oyster, that's the most abundant oyster that's commercially harvested, that would then spawn, and then the oyster larvae, they would settle down in August, basically. So you would have a benefit relatively quickly. Once that material is established and bound together by the activity of the calcification process that the oysters do naturally, you've got a lovely hard substrate, basically, where then further organisms are being attracted to settle down onto, and further oysters are being attracted as well. Oyster settles on oyster on oyster on oyster, basically.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Bloomfield, Sunnox, and then Ellis.
Okay, Councillor Ellis asked the first part of my question. I'm just interested if there is any potential threat towards existing species of plants or animals by introducing these on a mass scale.
That's a very good question. So we have to accept that the Pacific rock oyster that is currently being commercially grown all along the estuary is an invasive introduced species. but I think it has naturalized so far now that we now have to accept that this is part of our natural system. Typically, there is concern from bird watchers, for example, the bird community. They believe that the mud surface in itself may be of greater benefit than an oyster reef, but that is debatable because I think the data isn't really that strong. One has to look at what the effect on bird populations actually would be. And we know that estuaries are very important resting ground for many migrating birds. The other points that we haven't really talked about yet is the potential for oyster reefs to bury excessive carbon, to build up material that takes carbon away from the atmosphere. So there are benefits there, but you were asking more on the other side on what are the drawbacks. We've just started to look at the output of climate active gases from oyster reefs like that. So we are just running a project this summer. We started this to look at the flux of methane, global greenhouse warming gas, and CO2 as well. So how do the oyster reefs affect the biogeochemical cycling of these climate warming gases? And it might well be that there will be differences between a muddy seabed and an oyster reef, but it's too early for me to actually tell you what direction that may be. If methane output was decreased, you would have to be really quite careful about that idea. But I suspect it probably will not, because it just changes the biodiversity and the processes in the reefs such that probably methane production, which comes out of the seabed all the time, from the mud surface now, will probably be reduced. At least that would be my expectation, my educated guess.
Okay, Councillor Sunnox and then Ellis.
Yes, this is my first meeting that I've been able to attend this panel, and I thought I'd know nothing about it. And then the very first subject that comes up is right in the centre of what I've been doing for a long time. My feet have been cut up many times at Brightlingsea by the oyster bed there. I get good thick rubber boots on now before I go out there. And the pictures you showed earlier of the sea wall breaking up is just outside my family's land. Someone must tell me if I'm going into conflict of interest territory. And we've seen sea level rise. We've seen the sea wall being abandoned by the Environment Agency. And we've worked since 2014 to get a boating lake going down there to deal with the sea level rise. And my comments would be, if you want to know how to establish an oyster reef, I do hope you've talked to the oysterman.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
So
the first comment.
Yeah.
And this is good.
We I work quite closely with Colchester Oyster Fishery on various projects, and we had a focus group in May with representatives from Richard Hayward and from the Colchester Oyster Fishery, and pretty much everybody was invited. So we listened to the oyster fishermen. We discussed the idea. Initially, the oyster recycling, well, they are on board. The more shell comes back to their environment, they think the better it is, because the more oysters there are, the more seed population there is, the better it will be for their industry, they believe. Now, I then broached the topic, I said, Paul Harding, the managing director at Colchester Oyster Fishery, would you be able to bring that oyster material back to us? Obviously, there are constraints on what they can do and what they are willing to assist us with. So they basically said, there are problems in terms of the hygiene regulations, transporting that waste back in their vans, where they also transport the live shellfish products and other fish possibly as well. But we are in direct dialogue with them already.
Good. And then the second point would be that there's nothing in the world I would like more than the scheme to reinforce the seawall along that bit where you saw it. It's a tragedy going on there. It's unsafe. People are walking there. We've had to have the lifeboat and the helicopters out when people have hurt themselves there. It's just very sad. And of course, it's a huge threat for my family's land as well. But you have the serried ranks of it's an SSSI. You've got the MMO to deal with, got the Environment Agency to deal with. and all these people grind slowly. The thought of putting some oysters down in at Christmas and hoping for some development in the spring seems wild. And perhaps this is where the council can help you, is to cut through a lot of this, I'm going to call it nonsense, because that's what I think it is. This, you know, we have to be so many studies on whether it's better to have mud or oyster shells down there and so on. It is really inflexible. If we're going to deal with climate change, we've got to become a lot more entrepreneurial and flexible about dealing with it. So I think we're all on the same side, but I just don't think it would be helpful to underestimate the bureaucratic obstacles that would be in your way.
So when I was responding earlier, saying, you know, what is the timescale of this? I was thinking about biologically, what is feasible, not thinking about the legal framework. And I forgot to mention that in my response earlier, that, you know, how can the borough councillors help with that is obviously the political will. Once that is established, I would hope that then policy would follow from higher up, and that would make these, you know, entrepreneurial ideas on how to deal with sea level rise a little bit more accessible and a little bit more possible in a way.
It took me 5 years to get, everyone agreed the boating lake was just the thing to do, to deal with. It took me 5 years to get it through. It took 1 year to build it. It's those sort of proportions you're dealing with, you know, with this regulation we have to cope with. So if we as a councillor can help you accelerate that, then we should certainly do so.
Or vice versa, if we can help you to accelerate this, you know, we'd be happy to help.
Excellent. Councillor Ellis.
I'll be brief, because Williams said one of the things I was going to say, although, yeah, it's a Ramsar, isn't it? It's Ramsar and a triple SI. It's a really important site for migratory birds, huge numbers of waders. We're one of the main migration areas for widgeon, all of which rely on the mud. So I can see that there can be an issue there. You said you've been working with Essex Wildlife Trust already. I'm assuming that they're supportive. You need them to be, because the bird lobby is really strong. And if RSPB and people start complaining about it, then your 5 years might turn into 10 years. And the only other point was to say you can always barge stuff down. So if they can't take it in their vehicles, you could look at barging it down, collecting it somewhere in London, and then barging it down the river, which is what they always used to do. Certainly with the excrement from London, most of we have Peldon poo, because it was the excrement from London that was spread all over the coastline of Essex, unfortunately. But hey, the dumping ground for London excrement. Anyway, that's one of the ideas. But I do think it sounds like it's a fantastic idea, but it sounds like we really are at the very start of it, aren't we? And it may still not happen.
Yeah.
So it's a question of how we can help make it happen.
And I would not worry too much about the timescale, to be honest. At the moment, as you say, we're just on the onset. Whether this takes 5 years, 10 years, 20, 30 years, it doesn't really matter. As long as we keep pushing along those lines. It doesn't have to be, you know, within our generation, maybe the next generation, that will be even more pressing for them to do something about it, basically. Right? Yeah.
Thank you. I think most people have asked the questions I would have thought to ask. I guess the only other question is, what are the biggest barriers you're going to face to see this project through?
Okay, so I think in terms of running these projects is obviously the funding side. We need, you know, continuous funding. We need to open a new pot of funding, because this was just a little bit of pump priming initiative in order to keep the ideas going. But the next big point is then for us to really get our heads together and write a cracking proposal on this to attract more funding, and then have a proper study with a proper goal, a few trials on this, you know, how quickly would these oyster larvae settle in an environment where they have not been before, for example. That could be quite easily be done in you know, with scientific projects, basically. So it's the funding for us that we need to get going on. And again, this is where it comes back to you. We require support. You know, at some point we'll be called to Ben and to Rosa saying, like, look, mates, you know, we've got to move this forward. What is it that you can do for us in terms of showing your support, so that the funding councils, that they believe us, that this is something that is good for us all as a community.
Great. We've also got Councillor John Acker from Mersey online, who's got his hand up. So, John, if you want to unmute yourself, hopefully we can hear you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope you can all hear me. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak, sir, because the council is very interested. The town council is very interested in this proposal. And like Councillor Alice, I applaud cooperation between the town and Gown, and perhaps there should be more of this, because we've got a very active university, which I think could help the borough in no ends of ways. But what I would like to say is that, again, we are very much at the start of this. But my goodness me, your officers of the council, together with the university, have put forward much energy on this, and they put forward detailed plans. And it's something which I think we should try and see what we can do. Michael has mentioned COP27. The research which I've personally done indicates that there is considerable progress been made in other parts of the world. Certainly as far as New York is concerned, I've been amazed to see how much of a similarity there is between Mersey and the islands on New York State. They've got a very comprehensive plan to deal with climate issues, and I would recommend your officers do a bit of research about what New York State has done across the whole measure of climate control, because I think there's some really useful lessons for our community there. But I hope through COP27 next week, I'm glad that our Prime Minister is going now, that we can get connections going, both with New York and with Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia has also developed experiments in this area, and I hope that can feed in to the proposals. I've got some experience in fundraising with the Royal Society and with the research councils, and I certainly want to, on behalf of the Town Council, see what we can do. I'm very glad that the point was made about the oyster fishermen locally. They do operate quite independently and competitively. So there are challenges about getting people together. A lot of the oysters, in fact, from Mersey do go overseas. Richard Haywood exports an awful lot of his oysters to France. So there are problems about potentially of getting those back. But I hope certainly the Town Council on Mersey will do everything it can to progress this. And I'm very pleased that you've held the meeting tonight and allowed the Essex University people to put forward this in this way. And I hope that in future months we can actually get some more funding for this project, and it can be given a lot of attention, because flooding has been indicated on that part of the coast is going to be ever present for the years to come. Thank you very much, Ted.
Thank you, John, as ever. Some really good feedback there. And I've got Councillor Lissamore.
Thank you. I'm really sorry, and I may have missed it from the presentation. How much money do you actually need?
Well, that really depends on the scale of the project. This was a very small scale project. We were just able to luckily afford Beth to assist us with her research. This afternoon, Beth and I were discussing something up to a scale of 1 million. So this is, from UKRI, a centrally funded project, basically. There's a deadline on the 17th of January, which we're probably going to make, because these projects are very competitive and they focus more on the research side, whereas our project is heavily based on community engagement and more the social side as such, not so much the natural sciences. So we're probably not going all the way to that scale. You have to remember, if you were to hire somebody for a project running for 3 years, this salary alone under full economic costing figures would be £500,000 already. So the £1 million sounds like a lot, but actually it's just salary for a few years, basically, right? So we've got to realize that. So it heavily depends on the sort of science and equipment that we would be doing in a project like that. If it's relatively cheap and you do something in the community, it's more education focused, it's a different costing than if you actually would have to go out to see and trial things. You may need some research done, some surveys done. That's a different costing, basically, right? So it heavily depends on the type of project, and the type of project that we would be designing depends on the type of call that we see an opportunity to go for. So we're constantly scanning what's going on, what is the next call, where would we fit the best way, and then adjust accordingly. Research councils typically are very interested in multidisciplinary work. So this is where it's so interesting that we've got a sociologist, somebody from the business school, we've got fishermen, somebody from the life sciences school, some borough councillors involved in all of that. That makes it really quite attractive in a way, right? So multidisciplinarity and various interests in the community are a big bonus in all of that. So I see that we would stand a really good chance in these multidisciplinary type of project calls where we could interact and then tackle a question like this from various sides, from the natural scientist side, the research side, but then also the socioeconomic side, and do that in tandem, basically.
So I was pluck a figure out of the air.
Okay.
If you had, the perfect world and everything fell into place the way you want it to do, how much money would you like to actually do it? We're talking, obviously talking tens of millions, I presume.
So the next, traditionally the next step would be a 2 to 3 year project involving postdoctoral scientists to push the project forward, and that would come at about 750 to 800,000 pounds.
And then to implement it, how much are you talking about to implement?
This would be an implementation already at a small scale. So, for a place like the Colchester Borough Council or for Mersey Island, that would be covered. You would have plots, provided the legal framework is in place and people agree that we can do this. You would have plots in front of Mersey Island, I would imagine, where this can be tried at a decent scale, at a meaningful scale. It's not just tiny, reductionist scientific approach, but it's meaningful for actually trying to see what effect that would have on coastal erosion in the future.
Ellis.
Maybe I missed the point when you were mentioning Nantucket or what have you earlier, because I thought this was something which had been tried elsewhere, or was, they were doing this elsewhere, you're trying to do it here. Therefore, I'm slightly confused about the research costs, or how you're going to be generating additional research costs if it's already been researched elsewhere. And also, if you're presenting this at COP, is there not an opportunity to get international support for this? So, and actually upscale it, or are you jealously guarding it as only something that Essex and Colchester are doing? It seems to me that if it's something that actually works, using shellfish or what have you to create natural reefs to stop coastal erosion, it seems a very sensible thing to do. But I would have thought you should get international funding rather than just worrying about the small beer that would be the Borough Council or even UK government funding, to be honest.
So that's clearly the reason. To work with people in the USA. The Billion Oyster project is that project that is currently running in New York Harbor or New York Island. And that's be quite successful in a way, but the local conditions, they have a large impact on the potential success of all of this. So I think the recycling, for example, shell recycling and involving the community would work more naturally along the east coast of the USA because the consumption is higher, local consumption is higher, people buy more oysters, they would more readily dump that material in a particular bucket, wheelie bin that the council provides. If we would try to project that to West Mersey, the situation is slightly different. The oyster fishermen, they guard the oyster shell quite closely and they are selling oysters in their own restaurants. So they basically want all of that material back in order to put that straight into the fishery for commercial gains. So it's a slightly different situation, I guess, in a way. What was your second point? We were talking about Nantucket, and then you moved on to.
I'm quite looking forward to the site visit to New York. For the
Oh
committee
yeah, no, I wanted to say.
And Asia, by the sounds of things. It
So
sounds like we're doing-
yeah, me too. The other point that I wanted to make, obviously, a few years ago, European funds would have been the natural go-to, right? So this is still in the debate, and the way that the finances are going at the moment, it's unlikely that we'll be part of that in the future. But I don't know. You may have an opinion on that. So it's difficult to find international funds for that. It would have to be carried mostly by a national funder. However, there are sometimes links where the funders decide, okay, we now want to work very closely with our Canadian counterparts for a polar research project. The UK wants to be involved in Canadian polar research. Similar things happen on the environment side in coastal environments. We want to co-develop ideas on how to protect our coast because it's a global problem everywhere. So funds do come available. Sometimes there are more charitable organizations that put forward some funds to improve the livelihoods of people living along the coast. So we're scanning the horizon. We are looking at what funds, pots of money may become available, and then act accordingly.
Anything down a very long time, sorry, on this one topic, but it was more that if you've got research has already been occurring, because it must have been occurring in the States for them to be them to be undertaking this, can you not skip some of the steps?
Oh, absolutely.
You would have to take and just use that research for here. I mean, I understand there might be some adaptation because of different climate, what have you, but at the end of the day, I would have thought that you should be collaborating with academics elsewhere to make sure that you're not repeating the process, because that would be a ridiculous waste of money.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're not starting at zero. We did literature review. Beth was involved in that to understand what the knowledge base is at the moment, where things are going. And Boroka, she is from New York, spent much of her life living in New York. So she went at one of her recent visits to talk to the people involved with the Billion Oyster Project. So we're establishing the links, or we're trying to establish the links with these other groupings, and in order to move our project forward.
Okay, I'm going to give Councillor Sykes the last comment, and then we'll finish it there.
Yes, I'll be really brief. It doesn't sound as if there's actually that much science in this. It sounds as if the science has been done, and it's the matter of finding a place, and this is where we should be able to help, where we can, a relatively bureaucrat-free place where you can just do it and see if it works. And I think that would be a more constructive approach than thinking about COP27 and New York and international and everything else. There might be something local we could do if we could find the right place where you're not in the hands of the Environment Agency and the Marine Management Organization and Natural England and everything else.
No, I completely agree with that. You may know that there's a restoration box in front of West Mersey, where INORI, the Essex Native Oyster Restoration Initiative, tries to establish the native oyster, which is different species to the Pacific rock oyster that's commercially harvested. So, this is possible. There's a precedent for that. And the question is then, can we identify a good area where we could try building oysteries with the Pacific rock oyster and with the material that we should have available to do that?
Okay, Great, thank you very much, Michael.
I thank
A
you.
lot of
Yeah,
questions.
no, thanks for your interest. Much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Just gathering from that as well, there seems to be unanimous support for this and for Colchester Borough Council to support this project. Any hands if you reject that, that's absolutely fine. No, so Matthew, if you're happy to note that, because I think the actions are screen's gone. The actions are to present feedback. So I think we're happy to feedback that we're happy for Colchester Borough Council to continue working and supporting this. And obviously any help you need, Michael, just email all councillors and we'll try and make sure this goes around to all councillors as well so they know what's going on. Excellent. Anything else to add, Ben, to your report, or is that pretty much it? So I think the main thing that Ben raised was that we've added another section to the Climate Emergency Action Plan, which was about adapting to essentially current climate change, which is quite apt considering we had the hottest October on record this past month. Any comments on this, or are we happy to accept what Ben's put before us, or do we want to add any feedback? So Councillor Lismore and Councillor Ellis.
Sorry, I don't want to prolong this any longer, but just my concerns about, obviously we're hearing a lot about budget cuts coming up. How do you, we don't know what's going to happen, but how concerned are you that grants to go electric or reduce emissions are going to affect the plan in the next few years?
I think that's a good question, because a lot of the major projects for some of our assets would cost a lot of money to fund, and there is sort of limited grant pots at the moment. There's one sort of major one from government that had a funding committed to it for the next 2 years, assuming it doesn't get pulled, which it might do. But I think a lot of the actions that we've got, and we are trying to work up sort of costed actions, for example, on our buildings to save emissions. A lot of those will also save energy as well. We'll have a payback. So if we do have to borrow money to make those projects go ahead, they will pay back quickly. For example, things like solar PV has a very quick payback at the moment, particularly with electricity prices as they are. So I think there's opportunities for cost savings quite quickly through some of those decarbonisation projects. But I think everyone will from local authorities will keep making calls to government. There was recently a net zero review done by Chris Skidmore, who asked what do local authorities need specifically to help with the net zero agenda. I'm pretty sure every local authority who fed back into that said about funding, and people will keep lobbying for funding because otherwise you will achieve it. So,
Councillor Ellis.
Thank you. It was something I'd said in the briefing, Chairman, really. It was on the communicating engagement thing, Ben, or theme. And it was just that obviously it certainly retrofitting, etc., is quite an expensive thing to do, and it's going to become well, it's getting more and more expensive, obviously, at the minute. With cost of living crisis, etc., if there is anything that you can do that actually saves you money, I think we should be really pushing that at the moment. It's an opportunity to try and, if we're going out to the public, to say we are doing this and we've updated it, and these are things that you can do. I think anything which is going to help save people money is where we should be pushing it. It might help with some of the engagement with the public at the moment.
Yeah, obviously the cost of living is one of the council's priorities, and I think with a lot of the projects that we're doing, we're very well aware of that. So, and we're promoting some of our active travel projects, for example. I think through things that we might put on social media or our website, I think we're trying to weave in the messaging around cost saving as like a big thing, maybe rather than necessarily it being the emissions reduction that it does help to do as well. Obviously, you mentioned retrofitting specifically. Council is trying to work on getting access to a new energy company obligation scheme that's being run by Ofgem, which will allow funding to be available for residents on the lowest incomes and the poorest energy efficient homes to get access to funding for energy efficiency. So once we know more about that, we can let you know about that as well. And we'll be talking to obviously residents to promote that scheme as well. So.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you.
The
concerns have been raised about being able to fund these schemes, and you quite rightly looked at the situation with I'm borrowing. Is there ways of tapping into the government's green investment bonds as a source of funding for us, as my first question? And the second thing on the dealing with the retrofitting or the improvement of the housing situation, I understand one of the difficulties is that actually Colchester's housing stock is generally of a relatively high standard compared to many other ones, and therefore we're not getting our fair share of the government grants because it's going directly to the most deserving councils rather than to us. Again, what?
Yes, I have to come. I think I know what Councillor Ellis is going to say. So on the housing stock point quickly, the energy company obligation funding that I was talking about, that's for private homes within the borough, not Colchester Borough Homes housing stocks. That's just a grant that's available. Obviously, the council will be making a bid into the social housing decarbonisation fund, which is for our housing stock. Obviously, we might not be successful, but we will be trying to get funding for our own housing stock as well as just private homes in the borough. But so that address that point. On the green investment bonds, it's not something that I've looked at or seen anything come out from support bodies such as local government association promoting it as a way that we can access it, but it's something I can definitely look at afterwards. Yeah.
I've got Councillor Lismore.
Thank you for letting me come back. Just one other point about weed killers. I think we've had a bad year. I mean, whether it was sort of almost a perfect storm this year, but with the phasing out of the weed killers and the weakening of those weed killers over the last few years as well, we've had a very bad year for weeds that seem to be particularly deep rooted and particularly strong. And it's sort of I want to say a word of warning. Please, can we ensure that we don't have any knee-jerk reactions, such as the removal of certain weed killers, without ensuring that we have a plan in place to deal with that problem? Because I think what we've seen this year is the removal of the use of certain weed killers, and there are arguments for and against that, which we certainly can't get into here. But we didn't seem to have a plan in place this last summer to actually do an alternate, and we've ended up in a very difficult situation. I see on the thing you try hand pulling. Have you actually tried pulling some of those weeds? They were hell. We actually purchased strimmers ourselves and went round and trimmed some areas, but that was almost impossible to hand pull those weeds. They really were incredibly deep rooted. Could have been the weather this year, but who's to say we're not going to have that weather again another year? So please, can you ensure that if we want residents to be involved and that we communicate that, but also please ensure that we have alternates in place, that we don't just remove certain things because it might be the right thing to do, but please can we ensure that that it's communicated and that we have alternatives? Thank you.
Okay, I think that is all the comments on the climate emergency strategy. I've got nothing much more to add to that. So we're to agree to, oh no, sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Ugh, gone too far ahead to the waste. Too exciting. Right. Yes.
I just want to make one point, and I don't know when to bring it up really about I know I made it at the briefing about biodiversity net gain. And is that something that comes under, would that come under this, Rosa, or would it come under your woodland thing? I don't know. I'm concerned that obviously there's an opportunity within planning where developers have got to provide net gain. And I just want to make sure that Colchester are in the game, which is what I'd said before, to make sure that we have got, bearing in mind it does pertain to this, if we have got projects that we want to do within the borough, I want to make sure that we could use funding from developers who are unable to get the net gain on their development, which a lot of them can't, and actually make sure we've got our own bank of projects that could be utilized, we could utilize that funding effectively. So we make sure that the bio net gain comes as low as possible to Colchester rather than going elsewhere. So it's just something within this strategy. I don't know if it sits within this strategy or not, but it's something that we should be doing. And I would have thought it probably sits within this.
Yes, so I think there's quite a bit of a mention of it in the woodland biodiversity. But if we can make a note on that, Ben and Matthew, to, I think, add that to the strategy, that would be quite helpful. So using 106 funds, as we say, for net gain around the borough if they can't be met on those developments, as you say, especially some of the brownfield sites we have. I think that makes sense, yeah. Councillor Sunnox.
Yes, I wanted to build on that point, and I was going to raise it under the work programme actually, because we've got next year, we've got biodiversity net gain 10% becoming compulsory, isn't it? So we're going to have huge problems with developers not able to develop their sites unless they can find offsetting sites. The rules aren't there, the market's not developed, and we ought to have a work stream to look at that. That does seem to be one area of regulation which we need to get sorted out because the world's changing around us.
I mean, just on this as well, we do need to be careful because on some sites, developers will use it to their advantage to say, oh, we couldn't possibly do that. So we want to build another house there, but you'll have to find somewhere else and here's some money. So we do have to be careful on some of those sites. But yeah, I take your meaning on the smaller sites where there's little opportunity to do that.
We need to be proactive on developing the policies and regulation around that. Much
Yes,
more
I
proactive.
mean, a lot of that will come under planning as well. We do have to be aware that will come under the planning committee, but maybe one we can talk to them about. I could talk to Karen and co. Great. Okay, so yes, we are to review the new iteration of the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Members are encouraged to present feedback, which we've done, and how it can be communicated to residents as a source of education and inspiration. So I believe comms did come up before, and it'd be good to get some good comms on actually the big presentation we had earlier. When that gets moving would be really good. And Ben's highlighted some of the things we're doing to highlight some of those. So yeah, unless there's any feedback, we'll move on. Yes, Councillor Sunnox.
I promise this is the last thing I'll say this evening. When it comes to comms, it isn't the matter of dumbing down the science. If you listen to people talking about some of this stuff in the pub, it's the science they love. So I hope that we won't have a PR wash with pretty diagrams and so on, but we'll actually tell people interesting stuff that they can do to make things better and not shy away from the science and technology in it.
Cool. Good feedback. Okay. Brilliant. So we're coming up to 7:30. I would suggest we have a 10-minute comfort break before the next item, which is the recycling and waste strategy, which could be a long one. So yeah, we'll have a comfort break. Feel free to grab yourself a snack and be back for just after 22. Okay, right. This moves us to item 8 in the agenda, which is recycling and waste strategy development proposal. I think it's you, Rosa, by the look of it. Excellent.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the current waste vision and strategy was developed and launched in 2015 and 2016, respectively, and the lifestyles and behaviours of the residents in Colchester have changed quite significantly since then. And as a society, there's been greater focus on the impact of the environment, as we've been hearing about already this evening, with the council declaring a climate emergency in 2019. And in addition to that, the borough has continued to grow and change over the last 7 years. However, the council and its residents are performing well in terms of waste and recycling. Colchester sits in the top tier of those performing well in the Eastern region for the amount of residual waste and percentage of recycling that residents produce. However, there are changes afoot for us. In the main, the Environment Act proposes to legislate and bring forward a number of initiatives in the coming years. There are 3 main areas that I'll just briefly talk about. The first is something called the Extended Producer Responsibility for Packaging. This proposal will see a mechanism put in place so that packaging producers will be fully responsible for the costs of managing packaging that they put on the market. So that includes the collection and disposal of packaging. The second initiative is called the Deposit Return Scheme, and that proposal instigates an upfront deposit for plastic, metal and glass drinks containers that the public will need to pay, which will then be reimbursed at return points. And then thirdly, most importantly for us in this conversation, is the consistency in household and business recycling. And this aims to standardise the materials collected across the UK from households and businesses. So no matter where you work or where you live across the UK, the materials that you'll place out for collection will be exactly the same. In addition to that, Essex Joint Municipal Waste Management Strategy is under review, and I've got a colleague on the line, Jason Sarles, who will talk to you in a moment about the strategy development for that as part of the Essex Waste Partnership, of which Colchester is part of. And then further to that, there is also the Climate Change 6 budget, the local development plan, and obviously the operational challenges that I've outlined. What the paper proposes to do in terms of developing a new strategy is that the panel, along with the portfolio holder, will work through a number of workshops, appreciating that there's going to be lots of detail that the panel will want to discuss and explore. And we acknowledge that the forward programme won't allow for the amount of time required, as I'm sure panel members will want to discuss the items and project. These workshops are going to be facilitated by officers, the consultant who can help bring an external voice and challenge as we develop that strategy. And through those workshops, we'll develop visions and aspirations for the borough. We will consider options and prepare a recommendation of the strategy for Cabinet, which will be based on data, pilot project work, evidence and evaluation. And it's hoped that the new strategy, working towards 2030, will aim to deliver value for money, provide a safe, compliant and resilient service, have a community asset-based approach, minimise the impact on the environment and be transformative. Just to note, those bullet points aren't in any hierarchical order, they are all as important as each other. And it's proposed that working through those workshops over the next few months will lead to a draft strategy being prepared by August, September next year. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll pause there for a moment and hand over to Jason Sarles from Essex County Council to talk a bit more about the waste strategy, Essex broad waste strategy, before taking any further questions.
Thank you, Rosa. Yes, if it's okay, I'd just like to spend a few moments just giving a little bit of an update on a separate but complementary piece of work that's underway to refresh the Essex Joint Waste Strategy. Just for the benefit of panel members, the Essex Waste Strategy is a statutory requirement that sits with all two-tier local authority areas. And that requirement requires councils in those areas to develop and maintain a joint strategy for how we intend to manage waste across the two tiers of local government. So reflecting on the fact that we have a collection authority function sitting with the 12 district, borough and city councils, and the disposal authority function that sits with the county council. And it recognises that obviously the activities of one party has an impact on the activities and the obligations of the other party. So it's really looking at how we collectively work together to deliver waste management in an efficient and effective way across the county. As Rosa mentioned, we have an existing joint waste strategy which was adopted back in 2009-10. So we've obviously seen a massive change in the legislative and policy framework, which will require us to review and refresh that strategy. So just for the benefit of members, the strategy that we have within Essex, the joint strategy we have within Essex, is currently being undergoing a refresh through the Essex Waste Partnership. So the Essex Waste Partnership is an advisory group with representation from members from all 12 district, borough and city councils, as well as the county council. And that partnership has commissioned a piece of work to model the impacts and outcomes of various collection, treatment and disposal regimes to provide some information through to the partnership to help them develop a future approach for the Essex Waste Strategy. So the modelling activity that's currently underway is nearing a reporting phase. So we are looking to report outcomes from that modelling through to the partnership in the next month or so. And that modelling will enable the partnership to take a view around the level of shared ambition and approach that we may wish to adopt for the treatment of waste across the county as a whole. It will also enable the partnership to come together to start considering what the guiding principles are for the overarching waste strategy for Essex. I think the one thing I think we just need to recognise is the different functions of the joint strategy as opposed to Colchester's recycling and waste strategy. So the joint strategy is very much that umbrella strategy which looks at the high level vision and ambition for the partnership and the waste authorities as a whole, whereas the local strategy, so in this case the Colchester recycling and waste strategy, is more operationally focused and will look much more at the detail around delivery. Now obviously they will need to be complementary, and the joint strategy for Essex will have a large amount of flexibility in it, bearing in mind that it's there to provide a overarching framework for all 13 authorities that make up the Essex Waste Partnership. The strategy that is being developed across Essex will need to go through a public consultation process, and we are working on the basis that a consultation on that strategy will be launched in late summer 2023. And obviously, as we move through that approach in terms of the development of the guiding principles of the strategy, that will go through a process of engagements through the Essex Waste Partnership, through your lead member on that partnership, and obviously then be fed back into Colchester City Council in terms of engagement and feedback prior to the launch of the consultation in the summer. Adoption of the strategy will obviously be very much dependent on the outcome of that consultation phase. But we would expect adoption towards the tail end of 2023 or early 2024, which will then provide a framework, I think, particularly for the County Council, in terms of future proposals for development of waste treatment and disposal options for residual waste streams generated within the county. I think I'll leave it there, but as I'm happy to take any questions that the panel may have.
Okay, thank you very much. I have Councillor Smith.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. Looking at the points in 5.5, the extended producer responsibility for packaging, great idea. Has there been any indication from the government that these funds will be ring fenced to the collection and disposal agency, or will it just go into a general tax that they will pay, then it won't find its way back? The second one, and I think probably more important, is the plans for consistency in household and business waste collection. Great. Every council in Essex seems to collect something different. I understand the need to have a common thing. When is that going to be available? Because that surely is going to feed an awful lot of what we need to do. Because if, for example, I understand some authorities in Essex, garden waste and food waste is commingled, and some it's separated in. Depending on what the government says you have to do, whether you do it separate or together, will have a big impact on how waste is collected. And we'd be very foolish to do a lot of consultation and people say they want one thing, and then we find out, I'm terribly sorry, the government said you're commingling. So I'd like to get answers to those two first, and I have a supplementary if I may.
Okay. So firstly, in terms of the funding and the extended producer responsibility for packaging, what the government's proposal is to set up a main body that will put in place all the mechanisms to get that funding from the packaging producers, and then that will be then distributed to local authorities. The funding stream hasn't been firmed up from government in terms of how that will come to local authorities and how that will be funded. It's still in very early days. In terms of the Environment Act and these three schemes, they have been heavily consulted on the last couple of years. There has been a delay in bringing forward any more detail around the proposals. We were expecting some more information in spring this year, but it's been delayed. So we're hoping to find out more towards the end of this year what the detail of those schemes will look like in terms of, as you say, the funding and how that will come to us. But it's been really clear that the funding that does come from those producers and into this main body will come to local authorities who are managing the waste and also littering as well. So that's really interesting to understand that, but we just, at this moment, we don't know how we will receive that funding or to what level. In terms of consistency in household and business recycling, again, the government has been consulting on that. What they've been consulting on is the separation of different materials, which Colchester's been in a really good place because we've been doing that for quite some time, with the exception of one additional material which we don't currently collect, which is flexible plastics, which is like crisp packets or bread bags. But as you say, there are lots of other authorities that are not in that position where they're commingling, for example. The government again are looking to bring a date for when this is going to start, and they did originally look at 23-24, but as we still haven't got the detail for that, that's going to be incredibly difficult to deliver. So we are expecting that to be further delayed, and they were proposing for those changes to first be applied to business recycling before applying it to residential collections, in order to make sure that the infrastructure behind the collection, i.e. the reprocessors, for example, for that to be set up. So there is still an awful lot of questions to be answered, some early indications of what it will look like, but that could still change. And that does include things like garden waste collection and food waste collection too.
Thank you very much. My second comment was on 5.15, where we look at the development of the strategy. Minimise the impact on the environment. It's a phrase that's struck me as, what exactly does that mean? Because it could be interpreted as very holistically looking at everything, or it could just be saying, well, if we use an electric vehicle rather than a diesel vehicle to collect the waste and take it to the landfill, that's minimising the environment. I'd like some confirmation that we are looking much more holistically than just a simple minimise the impact.
And you're quite right in that those 5 kind of objectives that have been set are quite simple and can be interpreted in lots of different ways. So I think what would be really useful is to work with the panel through those workshops to discuss that in much more detail, so that there's a really clear understanding of what that is and what the council should be or is aiming to achieve, and we can put more context to those aims and objectives. But that's very much within the panel to be able to create that. This is just kind of a starting point to create that conversation.
Any other comments at the moment? Councillor Kirkby-Taylor.
Thank you. While I completely recognise that for practical implementation reasons we need to have this kind of review periodically, and I completely applaud the needing to kind of recalibrate and refocus with the way that things are moving at the moment. We also need to recognise that we're only the collection authority. We don't actually get rid of any of our waste. That's down to Essex, who have a bit of a track record on not actually telling us where our waste is going. We've been trying for quite some time to get full clarity on where our recycling is being sent, which we have not had, and which Essex has refused to give us. And on top of that, we've then got things like waste incinerator being built in Rivenhall. So we've got some, we can only do so much. We need buy-in from Essex if we're going to actually do this, and we need to guarantee that Essex is going to uphold their side of the deal and do the recycling and actually get things sorted properly.
So it looks like Jason's got his hand up on the online Zoom. So come in, sir.
Thank you very much. Just to quickly comment on the recycling activity, Essex actually doesn't handle any of the recycling that's produced by Colchester Borough Council. That's actually handled by your own authority. We have responsibility for, we take on responsibility for dealing with the black bag waste, which is currently going to landfill at Stanway. And we also take on responsibility for dealing with your organic waste streams. So that's your separately collected food waste and your separately collected green garden waste, both of which are dealt with in facilities within the county. Apologies if you feel you're not being provided with data from Essex in terms of waste directions. That information is readily available, and I'm more than happy to work with your officers to make sure that comes through to you in a suitable format.
I'd like to apologise then. I appear to have got wrong end of the stick about exactly who it was that was disposing of what, but in that case it's CBC that we need to be clear about where our waste is actually going, because it is something we've been trying to work out for a while, and we've seen lots of reports of our recycling bags ending up all over the place in Indonesia and everywhere. So we need to get on top of this. We've got to. I thought it was Essex, but it appears it's actually closer to home than that. So
Yes, so yeah, we manage the Onward recycling, so glass, plastics, paper and cardboard. We've got full details of where those materials are going and audit trails as well. So yeah, happy to provide that, and I can give you details on them.
Thank you both. We did used to have a good kind of video animation that we used to share on social media and on the website as well, about how our waste was recycled, where it went. Be good to maybe see that come back, because we do get that question from residents, and I forget sometimes where we are sending it. So just questions I had on, well, more comments on this. What would be really good in these workshops is to look at what we did well and what we didn't do so well the last time we changed the waste service. So 2016, I think that was late 2016. You know, there's some things we did quite well that were good ideas, such as we did events where we gave out the recycling bins and so forth. Arguably weren't as well advertised as they could have been. So that's a lesson learned there. But we also know when it was implemented, it was quite confusing. We were spending a lot of time with miscollections and so forth. But as things do, it's worked itself out, and it seems to be fine now, except on a windy day. And of course, my plastics were today when it was very windy, so it blew everywhere. So I think that's a really important thing to do. I don't know how many of the senior staff are left from that overall project, because I know some have retired or moved on or promoted, so forth. But for me, that would be something really important to look at in its first couple of workshops about how we can get this right, because we as councillors took a lot of the brunt at that time, especially Councillor Smith, because he was leader of the council, oversaw it. But it was difficult, and sometimes we as councillors didn't know what was going on at the time as well. So it did seem chaotic at times, but well, quite. But it's but it has kind of worked, and we've seen recycling rates go up, but we can always do better. And just for context for people listening in, the masses that are listening in tonight, the reason we are partly looking at this as well is that we had a peer review, and one of the big issues that was highlighted was the fact that our waste service needed reforming, because it was quite complicated, or that's how they found it. So part of the reason why we are looking at this. So it could take a year, well, just under a year, looking at the last workshop. And obviously there'll be some tough choices to make about how we do change this, and a lot may be dependent on legislative issues. But any other comments or questions from anyone? Councillor Ellis.
It was just around the workshops, actually, which I think are a really good idea, and I'm looking forward to doing that. But I would just, so I wasn't going to comment lots tonight. People will be very pleased to hear. Councillor Smith is a substitute member this evening, but obviously has would have quite an input, or probably be quite interested in taking part in some of those workshops. Are they solely for the panel, or are they going to be some open to councillors from outside? I know it'll be a panel recommendation to cabinet, but I'm just wondering if one or two of them might be open, or at the end it might be opened up to a wider audience than just panel members.
So I think we can incorporate flexibility into this. The most important thing is that we get the right insight and the right people contributing. So what I wouldn't want to feel is that members that aren't part of this panel cannot contribute. Of course they can. They can do that directly to the service. I'm sure you as panel members can act as a conduit to that too. But clearly, if particular members have a very specific interest and want to be part of discussions, we would try and accommodate it. I'm just mindful it's a service that lots of members will be passionate about, and lots of members will probably want to contribute to. And at the end of the day, we will have to have a relatively focused group in order to move things forward. So very, very happy to be flexible and incorporate one or two additional members if that makes sense.
I was thinking past portfolio holders, etc., have had to cope with change within the service already, might have some interesting insight at some point, not necessarily at every workshop, but we'll have to see. But I'd appreciate someone else being.
I wonder if we could address your point, Chair, about what went well, what didn't go well, by having a wider first workshop that invites all, as you say, describe it, past portfolio holders or any other councillors of interest, and almost do that kind of brainstorming workshop gathering before we then move on to the other workshops, which will be more focused and where panel members can feed back to those other councillors. That might help cover those both points off.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. And Councillor Smith, you put your hand up.
So yes, I'd be very happy to do weighing assistance. I mean, after all, last time we did do it, we achieved the third highest rate of recycling growth in the country when we reorganised the way it. As you quite rightly say, those of us who were councillors at the time know that there were issues. However, the end result was extremely good.
The end result was excellent. It's a question of that the issues were a nightmare when they happened, and I think it's learning from those mistakes and making sure we can try and address that so they don't happen again. That, I mean, I've been in a meeting this morning where we're going to have to learn from some mistakes that were made and not repeat those. And I think we have an opportunity. It's happened a couple of times when we've done things within the waste service. When change is made, it's the biggest service, I think, that the taxpayer in Colchester sees. I mean, they think that's what we do, isn't it? Really, is the council. We just collect their waste. We do so much more than that, I know, but it's a really, really important service. And when it goes wrong, it's fairly catastrophic often in the wards or areas in which it goes wrong. So managing that and making sure that we don't repeat those mistakes. I'm sure we won't with you two in charge. Flattery should get me everywhere, as you say, but hey, they're dynamic, and actually we should be really proud of the officers that we've got within this authority, and certainly these guys do a fantastic service, or run a fantastic service. So thank you. Credit where it's due. We should always say thank you.
Right, and Councillor Arnold.
Yes, I really, really like the idea of the workshops, and I only see there's only one for the depot with the chance of a second one if you can't make the first one, because there's only one scheduled.
Yes, so the first one we're intending to do at the depot, living and breathing what we do and how we do it and where the material goes, etc. And we can use that as that opportunity to explore what went well and what didn't. The rest are planned to be on Teams with the consultant supporting us. However, we can always do it hybrid and have it at the depot as well. And if you want to come and have anybody actually wants to come and see what we do at the depot, they're more than welcome to. We always welcome visitors and have a walk and talk and show what we do. So yeah.
Just on these as well, would it be possible, I mean, it'll probably happen at the depot anyway, to have some of the senior crew there as well, just to give their experience? Because there is that disengagement between middle management and the people on the ground. I think it'd be really good to hear from them, especially about some of the struggles they've had with areas that don't have wheelie bins. Would be quite handy, because I've had those personal chats with them, and yeah, can be quite a struggle. So I think that would be helpful, and maybe if some of them could attend the other workshops, if possible, just to give their opinion, because I don't want it becoming something that is well, none of us have been men, so you know, we're completely detached from it. I had Councillor Lismore had your hand up.
I can honestly say no, I'm not a bin man. No. I just am a bit concerned with this about bringing residents along with us. We know mistakes were made last time in communication, and okay, perhaps you can say, well, we were right because look at the recycling levels. Yes, but because residents see this as the number one service that they get from the council, it is absolutely vitally important to bring them along with us. So are we really just planning this and then use us as councillors to reach out to the residents? Or are we just going to go after the fourth workshop, ta-da, here's the strategy? You know, how you're saying pre-consultation draft strategy presentation. So are you then going to go to consultation with residents? And where do you see, if you could look in your crystal ball to next August, September, where can you see the clashes with residents? Where do you think the problems are going to come about?
So it is pre-consultation, and as Jason alluded to as well, the Essex-wide strategy is going to be consulted around summer next year. So there's an opportunity there to look at the feedback that we get through the Essex Way strategy to also help further inform our own strategy, which by about August, September time, we should have something outlined. And that's based on work that we'll be doing, looking at the data pilot projects as well, because there are going to be some things that we potentially are able to start delivering early on, not looking for any big bang changes, which will help inform us and understand we can make changes going forward. So a bit coming back to your point around learning, we're keen to see how we can do small pieces of work and roll them out with learning. In terms of areas of conflict, I guess those 5 objectives that we've talked about, delivering value for money, providing a safe, compliant, resilient service, a community asset-based approach, reducing the impact on the environment and be transformative, they could potentially all clash with each other as well, because delivering the impact, reducing the impact on the environment may not cooperate with delivering value for money, or vice versa. So actually the potential is around the challenge of the objectives that we're setting ourselves. So I think it's really valuable for us to explore those in more detail and understanding what we're actually trying to achieve. So there's lots of opportunities for us to pull information into this without us having to set our stall really clearly right from the beginning.
I am wondering on that though, do we maybe at the start of next year look at comms that say we are looking at a waste strategy, and maybe just have a website link that's updating residents on what's been discussed, make it a bit more transparent, because let's be honest, we might get to the stage where we're talking about coming back to charging for garden waste, for example, and we don't know, Andrew, I genuinely don't know. I'm just throwing out there, we know it was unpopular, but we might get to the stage where this whole committee and council says that's the only option, and then we throw it on people last minute. That's the worry around. I just thinking around comms and ideas, and there's some positive stuff to put out there as well about how we are moving forward.
And just to add to that as well, the proposal is that there will be a standing item on the public panel meetings as well, to provide a verbal update on the work that the panel's been doing between each meeting, so that it can be monitored through these meetings as well.
Councillor Ellis first.
So I was just going to say, well, the reason I said we won't be allowed to is I don't think you can charge for garden waste. I mean, legally, I don't think you can charge. No, I know, but I don't think they legally can do so.
So I think it's about 70% of councils actually do charge for garden waste.
Okay, I think
so that's a lot of councils breaking the law.
Exactly right, and I was looking into it recently, and I think I don't think they are allowed to charge for that. I need to check again, but I'm pretty convinced I'm right with what I'm saying. But I will recheck. Because I had talked about charging for garden waste, and someone came back to me and said you're not allowed to do so, and these guys are breaking the law effectively. The comment, actually you talked about bin men and talking to bin men, and it was just, I spoke to one the other day who's an ex-Metropolitan Police officer, who reckons it's the best job he's ever had, working for Colchester. He's only recently started. He's been doing about 6 months, I should think now, by the time I've had the conversation with him. And I just thought I'd put that out there. Again, it's feedback, and it's positive feedback, because we all talk to our binmen, I think, and say thank you. And he said it is the best decision he's made, taking a job here with the waste service as a binman. So never judge a book by its cover either.
Certainly not. And we've had good weather this year, so it's a nice outdoor job as well. Councillor Lissamore.
Yeah, sorry to come back, just a sudden thought. Are you going to be consulting in this round of consultations with parish councils at all? Obviously very concerned about the huge difference we have between urban collections and rural collections. I was just wondering, are you going to have any involvement with them at this stage?
It's not within the proposals for this, but obviously if we work together as a panel, feel that we need to have some representation as part of that work, the workshops or the discussions, and happy to look at that. But I appreciate that there's quite a mix of councillors on this panel, which represent varying different areas. So it kind of coming back to Rory's point about having workshops that have lots and lots of people and too much discussion that we don't get decisions made forward. It'd be worth us, exploring whether we've got that representation covered.
Yeah.
And I'm apologising immediately, as Richard did, having just Googled, can you charge for garden waste?
As I say, a lot of councils will be in trouble otherwise. I think only 3 authorities in Essex don't.
I can promise that someone did tell me that actually it wasn't legal, but it's not right, because I've just looked it up on the government side.
Good stuff. Yes, Rory.
Just to clarify, it may be, so the Environment Act as it stands, or what's proposed, is that councils must provide a free garden waste service in the future, or that's the message. However, it seems that they may be rowing back on that due to the overwhelming consultation response from local authorities who do charge, and the fact that there will be a significant gap in people's budgets for those authorities that do charge.
So just on representation as well, I mean, I was looking I was thinking initially it'd be good to get a couple of members from each group that represent diverse areas, but actually we kind of have that already. I mean, Councillor Sunnox represents probably the most rural area, you as well, Councillor Ellis, and then quite a few who are urban and a slight mix, plus Councillor Burrows usually would be here, is Wivenhoe. So we probably do have a good mix. I imagine Councillor Goss and Nissen would be involved as well as the 2 cabinet members. And as I say, I think the idea of bringing in people with former expertise, such as Councillor Smith, and there'll be others within, and whether we want to seek outside help of former councillors, I don't know, not too far back, of course, but recently might be of help. Anything we can to get the system right and do the best we can, I think. Rory.
The other thing we may do is look at opportunities to visit other local authorities who are performing particularly well or have various innovative models, and equally having the opportunity maybe to talk to members from those authorities or leaders who have maybe been through a process, implemented an option. So again, we could learn from that in the same way that we're looking to do that internally. So we'd like to look externally as well as internally.
What we do for Getting Colchester as well is we are one of the councils that runs the service in-house, which is, I think, something to be proud of. I mean, the amount of councils that use Veolia and have issues with that, and it's dealing with contractors, is quite an issue. But we actually run one of the best services in Essex, and we run it in-house. So I think that is something to be proud of. But any other comments?
We're going to be looking at the siting of, as in the depot, and whether that needs to move within all of this as well.
Not as part of this. This is purely around the actual operations. There's a separate piece of work that I'm doing around that's coming. That's through the grounds maintenance work. I can't remember which panel I'm reporting that back to. That's policy panel. So that's a separate piece of work, but we'll take into consideration obviously this and the broader work that we do in neighbourhood services.
So any other comments or questions on this? Great. So our recommended decision is to agree to undertake the work to develop a new strategy for recycling and waste as outlined in what we've seen. So if everyone's happy, we shall agree that. Great. I see no dissent. Excellent. All right. And that takes us to, sorry, gone too far. So item 9, which is the Woodland and Biodiversity Project Update.
It's me again.
To say Nick's not here.
No. So the Colchester Woodland Biodiversity Project, we're now into year 4 of the 5-year project, and we describe the project now as a unique opportunity for everyone to work together and develop a legacy of a greener borough for future generations. And our focus in this 4th year has been about continuing to develop the work from last year, planting trees in suitable areas, focusing on the naturalisation of sites, enhancing biodiversity further, reviewing our management regimes, and continuing to communicate changes to our communities. The report sets out how the project's aiming to bring about improvements in 3 key areas, and that's our environment, our wildlife, and most importantly, our communities. So I'm just going to list off a few of the key highlights of the project that we've delivered over the last year, and then open up for questions. So the team are currently working with a variety of different partners and organisations. They include the Big Green Internet, the Trust for Conservation Volunteers, the Ministry of Defence, Wivenhoe Town Council, the Unity Academy, Kent Wildlife Trust, and Together We Grow. We've been supporting Wivenhoe Town Council on a No Mow, No Sow programme, and we've been working with them to showcase the activity and what can be done in local communities and supporting continued action with that. We've also delivered a presentation to One Colchester Climate Change Network and are continuing to deliver presentations on this nationally recognised project to many other organisations and groups too. We're continuing to deliver the Colchester greening policy with the stopping of the glyphosate weed killer, but also looking at developing our rewilding of sites and reducing the grass cutting of other sites. We're continuing to develop really exciting plans for a nature reserve at Cymbeline Meadow. We've planted over 7,000 young trees, worked with 425 volunteers, and launched a new project called Community Orchards on the 1st of August this year, which is an open invitation to all community organisations, town and parish councils and schools to propose sites where fruit trees can be grown to provide habitats for wildlife and a food source for people and pollinators. And then lastly, which isn't in the report, we've most recently just taken on 4 Cheviot goats at Highwood Country Park, to be joined by a further 6 to support the enrichment of wildflower meadows. So great variety of different work that we're achieving, and we're looking forward to continuing that work this year and into next. Thank you, Chair.
Any comments, panel? So Councillor Smith and then Councillor Lismore.
Thank you. Yes, I think a lot of here is excellent. Talking about wildlife, though, I'm not seeing anything here about encouraging green links between the various areas. We develop a very nice area in Cymbeline Meadows and what have you, but if it's surrounded by housing, it's impossible for the wildlife to get there. And I think we're perhaps not paying enough attention to the wildlife links that we need between our various sites. And perhaps we should look at something like being included in there.
Yeah, it's a challenge that authorities who are working on these kind of projects face across the UK, because it's not land that's obviously in our ownership, and it is about looking at people in their homes, in their communities, taking some actions themselves, as well as developers, as we've talked about this evening as well. And we're very open to working with and supporting anybody that wishes to take action and do their part, whether it be rewilding or planting trees, etc. And so, yeah, we do identify that as an area that we want to work. But it's not something we can unfortunately just flick a switch with. We need to work with lots of different people. We're constantly talking to people through our work and identifying those opportunities. So, for example, one of the examples is the Big Green Internet on Mersey, where they have been actively, their aims are very much about building those networks, mainly to support the red squirrel. And we've been providing trees and offering support around that kind of project. So yeah, we're very open to talking with anybody about what we're trying to achieve and working with them.
Thank you. I do appreciate it, because I know that in my ward we've been very active on St John's Playing Field. We've planted trees there. We've developed a willow plantation that we've done there, but that's in isolation. We need to get planning involved as well, so that the fields next to it don't become built on. Otherwise, we have an isolated area and the muskjack deer will have nowhere to go.
So I've got Councillor Lismore, Arnold and Kirk Taylor. So Councillor Lismore.
Thank you. I'm very, very keen on the urban tree planting in roads. We've seen, with the hot summer that we had last year, we all now know the difference that trees planted in roads can actually make. My concern is that we're concentrating too much on residents groups. Now, there are vast areas of Colchester that are not covered either by a parish or by residents association. How can we work with perhaps just a group of residents that get together and want to see more trees in their road? How can we help them?
Get them in touch with me and my officers, and we will work with them, because we have worked with non-constituted residents groups where there is a commitment that they want urban trees in their residential streets, and we've been working with them. So yeah, please get them in touch with us.
Just on that, Rosa, will there be issues of Essex Highways and permission?
So we have been undertaking urban tree planting through funding through the Essex Woodland Partnership, and we've planted 140, and I think we're applying for funding for about 120 coming forward. And it's in sites where there has formerly been trees which have either died or have been damaged through accidents, etc. And we're looking to replace those. And in those situations, Essex are very open to that, because we're working with them through that Essex Forestry Partnership. Obviously, if it's in new locations, that's where it becomes more complicated. But we are working with Essex, looking at tree planting for St Nicholas Square, for example, where there are opportunities for us to introduce tree planting, we will try and do that.
So, Councillor Arnold.
I love the diversity we've got on the tree planting. I know you put different types of trees in to keep it diverse. With the trees, and it says shrubs, are we creating hedgerows for the ground dwelling wildlife as well? And that would be nice to have that put in there if we are, and having a diversity in that as well. So they've got the berries and things to eat as well. And how many of these trees we planted are still going and they've been looked after? What's the percentage of expectant to get through their first 5 years?
Yeah, so firstly, in terms of hedgerows, yes, we've moved away from year one, which was very much about trees, to understanding that actually we need to be diversifying, and so we've gone to shrubs and hedgerows as well. So yes to that, and yeah, I acknowledge that may have been an omission in the report. In terms of how many trees are still going, it's been a very tough year this year, incredibly tough, and we did all we can to try and encourage and sustain growth as much as possible through watering. We are continually reviewing all of our planting sites. As I say, we're into year 4, so we've got 3 years worth of planting. I can talk to the survival rate probably after the winter season, because we do tend to leave some of those trees, because some may look like they've died, but actually you start seeing some sprouts of green. So I wouldn't like to confirm at this point until we've allowed nature to do its bit and see if there's some rejuvenation, but it has been incredibly tough this year. In terms of going forward, just it's worth making this point. We aren't looking at as many tree planting sites this year as we have done in the last 3 years, mainly because we are acknowledging that we need to make sure we've got the right balance of green spaces versus tree planting. We wanting to work with others, private landowners, parish councils, schools, whoever who wish to take on hedgerow planting or tree planting. We're very much open to those conversations, and if you've got contacts or you share this opportunity, do let them know to contact us. And there's an opportunity now for orchards. But going forward now, it's very much looking at bigger projects such as Cymbeline Meadow, where we are looking at a whole tapestry of different ways of managing that site as a nature reserve. So we're taking on board all of the learning from the last 3 years and just continuing to develop, as I say, greener borough in Colchester.
Councillor Kirkby-Taylor.
Thank you. So where we're not mowing and we're no longer using weed killers, are we then also looking to capitalise on that renewal of growth by, say, introducing seeds of regional wildflowers that might grow those habitats naturally? One of the things about the lack of weed killers is that the weeds do come back quite strong, and as Councillor Lismore was saying, they can be a pain to get out. If can kind of outcompete them with wildflowers or with desirable planting, has that been considered? Has that been looked at? And is it something that we could push going forward? There are, as you say, there are sites where we're reducing the mowing, so we only cut once a year, and as I was describing to a councillor earlier, the way that we try and articulate that site is still maintained and not just forgotten by the councillors, we introduce a mowing margin. So basically we cut around the edge so that it demonstrates that we are looking after it. It also reduces any risk around sight lines, etc. The second point that you talk about is about the sort of rewilding sites, which are sites where we're not cutting at all. We're just allowing nature to take hold, where trees will naturally regenerate, etc. So with both of those sites, we are looking at it's a bit like the Wivenhoe project in its no mow no sow. We want to see what nature actually produces on those sites naturally. But what we're acknowledging is actually some of those sites where we are expecting wildflower growth
it's not happening. And actually the grass is so strong that it's overriding the wildflower as well. So this year, in the current season, we are looking to trial a number of different applications. So in some locations, we're looking at actual plug planting. Other locations we are overseeding, and other locations we're actually looking at stripping back the grass, and actually there's a rolled wildflower grass that you can apply. So we're applying those. We're going to again leave it for another season, see what takes, how does it go, and then we can start making an informed decision about what's the most appropriate methods going forward to encourage the wildflower that we're expecting to see. If nature doesn't take that first step for us, how can we encourage nature to do that? So yeah.
Wonderful. It is also worth saying on the areas we are mowing once, there are certain types of meadow that respond best to that being mown once in a year. And I'd hope that we're taking advantage of that and putting the right kind of grasses and the right kind of seeds in there.
Councillor Rippingale.
So this conversation has prompted several questions, so I apologise in advance. What is the method of us deciding where the no-mow areas are going to be is my first question. And in terms of tree planting, is there scope to replace trees where tarmac has been put where an existing tree was not replaced? Because that's quite common in Newtown. In terms of the orchard, do ward councillors have an option of designating a site? Because it seems quite focused on community groups and residents association. And my last question is, how do you plan to introduce green areas into urban wards? I've obviously started a project to green our alleyways in Newtown, and I'd like to see that type of project adopted by the council using these spaces. Is there any opportunity to do that as part of a scheme of work? And is there any opportunities on our allotment sites to extend our greening work?
Okay, so the methodology of choosing the initial sites was done mainly by our officers, but in consultation with the local ward councillors. It's a part of a trial project, so we are very open again to the suggestions of the public or ward councillors on any other additional sites that they would like to see introduced in the future. So yeah, happy to take that on board. Tree planting where the tree pit's been tarmacked over, let us know where those sites are. I'll explore whether that is possible or not. Yeah, let me know. And so we are already putting a bid in this year for additional tree planting. So if it's sites that we haven't already identified, then we can explore that. In terms of orchards, again, yeah, happy for you to talk to us. The reason why we focus mainly on communities is because we do want the communities to support looking after them so that they can benefit from the fruit that it's producing. So rather than the council just introducing an orchard and hoping that the community take it on board, we want the communities to tell us that that's what they want and for us to enable that to happen. The same applies really to green areas in urban walls. What you've done is fantastic, fully support what you're doing, and would love to use that as a showcase to others about how that can happen. And if we can support that in any way, either it being through providing the planting or connecting you with organisations such as Together We Grow, we fully support that as well. And then finally, allotment sites. We haven't done a lot of work in terms of the Woodland and Biodiversity Project with the allotments, but again, happy to explore those and see what the possibility is around that. Presuming that the allotment holders are residents, they're obviously entitled to trees from the from the Trees for Years programme, which is annual, and we're planning that again for this year. Yeah, we're happy to support whatever may come forward with this project. Our intention is very clear. It's about a greener future for Colchester. So any ways that we can help support that, then we will do that.
I mean, just following on from that, I mean, the work Councillor Rippingale's done on the alleyways as well is something that could be transferred across the town and really cheaply. So for example, we had a cabinet donated and we used that as a planter. And if you think about how much fly tipping we pick up, and a lot of it's furniture, there's an argument that some of that could be recycled for the same kind of projects if we could get this running. And I think Colchester could take a lead on that, because it's not just Newtown. Wards like Councillor Smith's, Greenstead, so forth, have those alleyways that do look a bit tired and worn. So when they were built, they weren't built to look pretty, more to be practical. There is an opportunity for that, and I think that would be a really good development of the wildlife and biodiversity project, because it has evolved over these last 3 years. One criticism I have got of it is that I haven't felt that the communication between ward councillors and the council has been there as much. So in our ward, we had trees planted, which was fine. But when we met the officer, it was very much like, they're going here and that's it. And that we were fine where they went, but it was kind of like we came up with other ideas and there wasn't really interest of moving that forward. And I think it'd be really good if we could start engaging councillors. We've got ideas of where we'd like wildlife meadows, for example, and ID Verdi keep mowing them down. That costs us money and we could stop that. There's little practical ideas that could be done all over the town, and you know, councillors should know their ward better than most. Not always the case, but in most cases we should know our ward better than most and know those ideas. And we have the connections with those resident associations. The one person who's going to complain if you put something here and here, we have those connections to kind of get the best that we can. I mean, other than that, I think the project has been good. I do have some concerns about some of the survival rates, but a lot of that is out of our control. We are in a climate emergency and this year's been pretty horrific, 42 degrees or whatever it was. That was a horrible day. But interesting to get those survival rates for January. So in the winter would be really helpful, especially for those planted this year, just so we can get an idea. But I imagine it won't be a pretty figure, but we are where we are on that one. But as I say, other than that, I think it is good. It is evolving. And I think there's opportunities like what Councillor Rippingale's doing to do more urban areas. And just a question as well, have we looked at what we can do in the town centre to make it a lot nicer? Because we've got the Colchester in Bloom have done a great job with the flower pots, and Queen Street actually looks nice sometimes, which is really good. And outside the Magistrates Court, as you come into town from the south, that looks really good. And where we've put the seating, just further down, we've made that really nice. Is there any other plans to do anything of this? Because we talked to green walls and didn't really look at that, but are there other things we can do?
So there are a few discussions offline at the moment about further opportunities for tree planting, but the parklets that were introduced along the high street have tree planting that were donated as part of the Woodland and Biodiversity Project. And as I say, we are looking at St Nicholas Square to introduce more trees there. So any other public realm projects, I'm part of those groups in the main, and we'll always champion that opportunity to bring more greening into those other areas. Again, it's similar to the discussion we've just had. If there are any other further areas that we can identify that enables us to put in some form of greening, then we'll happily look at that and try and support that as best we can.
And through Woodland and Biodiversity Project, are we working with the bid, or the bid kind of a bit more independent?
We worked with them on the parklets to bring the trees into those parklets. And this year the bids have done quite an interesting engagement piece around flowers and wildlife, etc. And we supported them as a council to enable some planters around the Watertown and Mercury Theatre as well. So we've supported that and connected with them on the Woodland and Biodiversity Project.
Councillor Rippingale again.
Sorry, I've been quiet the whole meeting and then I come out with many questions. I was wondering if we're working with colleagues at CBH to offer these schemes onto our council stock sites. We've done a small project at Schoolhouse to introduce a mental health garden essentially, but it's planters, in bringing it into quite brick-built buildings where there's not a lot of joy in some of those gardens. And I think there's a huge opportunity for us to add green spaces in council stock. We've got some wonderful gardeners in Grinstead from what I understand, and it would be lovely to roll that out to our council house stock. That, you know, there's been great examples in London where ownership has been given to looking at the ethnicity of the site and growing plants there that actually work within the ethnicity, and they've been using them for cooking and bringing the community together. So actually, I think there's a huge opportunity to improve the mental well-being of our residents in those social homes, but also to increase their green credentials. So I was wondering if there's any work being done with CBH on that.
I know that we did work with CBH in the early parts of this project, but it might be, as you say, it might be worth exploring that again as the project's developed and evolved. And what you've described is very similar to the work that Together We Grow do at the Big Garden that we've tried to introduce as part of this project. So yeah, I'll take that back to the project group.
Just come back on that. So I've met the lovely Wayne, and he's very much involved with the Folly project. I'm also the Wellbeing and Sustainability Champion on CBH's board. So I'd be really keen to explore those options with you guys to see if we can set up some trials in those more urban gardens.
Great. Any more comments or questions? Okay, our actions are just a note, of course, but I think some good ideas and some good discussions come out of that. So as I say, there is some really good work there coming out of that. Great, right. And I think that takes us to the work plan, doesn't it? There we go. Very long agendas and PDFs. Yeah, so we are down to the work programme. Oh. So we've got another meeting later this month, as this meeting was obviously postponed for the passing of Her Majesty. So end of the month, 29th, we are talking about carbon management plan and council's emissions. Ben, who has left, said we probably won't have the full details on that, but he'll explain that in the report. Clean air for Colchester. So I believe that's when we talked about looking at fining people who aren't turning off their engines, taking action there, looking at schools as a priority. And then 31st in the new year, active travel and electric vehicles update. And then on the 21st of March, another waste and recycling strategy update. So that's the work program at the moment. Any other suggestions to that, or can always be emailed in if we want to add any more? That sees us through to the electoral year. So I can't see any other hands up. Oh, Councillor Sonics?
Yes, I think you said you thought biodiversity net gain ought to be in the planning committee, did you? Or should might be local plan. Yeah,
I will talk to Karen about it and just check, but I think it would legislatively come under local plan or planning. I think local plan.
okay, so long as it comes in one or the other.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. That'll keep you busy. That'll keep you busy, Councillor Sonics. Great. Okay. So I've got no more comments there, so I will close the meeting. Thank you all for listening in and have a good evening.